What if I told you that the man who built one of the world's biggest companies was rejected more times than most people could survive? What if I told you that he was called stupid by teachers, laughed at by neighbors, and humiliated by examiners, yet somehow he kept going? Sounds impossible, right? Because we're used to believing that billionaires are geniuses, born with privilege, or just lucky. But Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba, had none of that. No money, no connections, no powerful family. Only a stubborn dreamer's heart that refused to quit. Let's rewind to 1964, Hangzhou, China. Now you have to imagine the scene. This was not The Shining. Futuristic Hangzhou you see today with its skyscrapers and luxury hotels. No. Back then, Hangzhou was just crawling out of decades of poverty. Streets were dusty, bicycles were the cars of the day, and families often struggled to put food on the table. And right in the middle of that backdrop, on September 10, 1964, a fragile baby boy was born into a family that had absolutely no wealth to its name. That boy was Jack, though nobody back then believed he'd ever become anything important. Jack grew up skinny, awkward, and constantly hungry. His family wasn't starving to death, but they were far from comfortable. He often wore hand-me-down clothes. Dinner was simple rice or vegetables, with meat being a rare luxury. If you're picturing a tough, almost hopeless environment, you're right. But here's the twist. While the world around him screamed limitation, little Jack had a secret obsession: English. Now, remember, this was the 1970s in China. Foreigners were rare. English wasn't a common skill. But Jack, this tiny boy from Hangzhou, fell in love with it. Not because it was easy, not because it was available, but because it gave him a window into a bigger world beyond poverty, beyond China's closed borders. And here's where the story gets crazy. Every morning, Jack would hop on his rusty bicycle and ride for miles, not a quick trip around the block, but long, exhausting miles to a local hotel where tourists stayed. Why? Because that was his chance to practice English. Picture it. A shy, skinny Chinese kid, sweating on his bicycle, showing up at dawn just to greet strangers. He'd say, "Hello. My name is Jack. Can I practice English with you?" Sometimes they ignored him. Sometimes they laughed. But many of them talked. And Jack listened, absorbed, mimicked, and learned far better than any textbook could teach him. That stubborn habit didn't just teach him English. It taught him courage. The courage to look rejection in the face and keep asking anyway. But when it came to school, oh man, Jack was a disaster. You know how we often imagine successful people as natural-born smart kids topping their class? Well, Jack was the complete opposite. He failed primary school, not once, twice. He failed middle school, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And when it came to the university entrance exam, the one chance in China that could guarantee you a better life, he failed that too. Not once, but twice. Think about that. Most kids fail once, and the shame alone makes them give up. Jack failed again and again, yet somehow dragged himself back every single time. His teachers didn't believe in him. His classmates laughed at him. Even his parents wondered if maybe he just wasn't cut out for academics. But inside, Jack carried something different, something no exam could measure. Every no from the world became fuel. Every rejection became a whisper in his soul. Not yet. And here's something powerful. Jack later admitted he was never good at math. In fact, he struggled with numbers all his life. Can you imagine? It's the man who would later run an e-commerce empire built on numbers, algorithms, and massive financial transactions could barely survive a math test. Yet he didn't let that stop him. Because Jack understood something long before the world did. Resilience beats intelligence when the game is long enough. By his teenage years, he was still poor, still failing exams, still riding his bike every morning to chase English conversations with tourists. Nothing successful about him yet. But here's what made the difference. While other kids were crushed by failure, Jack wore his failures like armor. Each one toughened him up. Each one made him sharper. Each one whispered that his story wasn't over. Imagine being a teenager, standing in a classroom where everyone else is moving ahead, and you're the only one repeating a grade again. Most kids would shrink. Most kids would give up. But Jack, he learned to laugh at himself. He learned to endure the sting of humiliation without letting it kill his spirit. That was the beginning of his superpower. Not wealth, not brains, not privilege, but the ability to hear the word no and keep walking forward anyway. And that's the tone his life would carry for decades to come. Because if Jack Ma's childhood taught him anything, it was this: life doesn't owe you a yes. But if you refuse to quit, you'll eventually carve out your own. So while his world kept saying, "Jack, you're not good enough. Jack, you're too stupid. Jack, you'll never make it," his heart whispered something else: not yet. But little did Jack know, rejection wasn't finished with him. In fact, it was only warming up. Imagine walking into interview after interview, dressed in your best clothes, carrying your resume, your hopes, your hunger for a better life, and walking out with the same answer every time. No, that was Jack Ma's reality. If childhood had taught him resilience, adulthood was determined to test it. After finishing school, Jack believed he was ready to step into the working world. He had practiced his English tirelessly, guiding tourists around Hangzhou, earning just enough to buy a meal. He wasn't rich. He wasn't special on paper, but he had drive. He thought someone would see that. Someone would give him a chance. But rejection followed him like a shadow. Police rejected. Hotels rejected. Restaurants rejected. You name it, Jack applied for it and you can bet he was turned away. More than 30 times he put his heart on the line with job applications, and more than 30 times doors slammed shut. But the rejection that stung the most: KFC. It was the mid-1990s, and a brand new Kentucky Fried Chicken had just opened in Hangzhou. For many, it was more than just a fast food restaurant. It was a chance at steady work, a salary, and a little stability in a country still finding its economic footing. 24 people applied that day. 23 got the job. Only one was left out. That one was Jack Ma. Think about that for a second. Not even KFC wanted him. Out of 24, he was the only one rejected. Most people would have given up right there. Most people would have said, "Maybe I'm just not cut out for this." But Jack? He shrugged, smiled, and kept moving. Because by then, rejection wasn't breaking him anymore, it was shaping him. Every failed application was a lesson. Every door that slammed became a message. You don't belong here. You belong somewhere else. And slowly, Jack started to believe that. He took jobs that no one else wanted: tour guide, teacher, translator. The pay was small, the hours were long, and the work was thankless. But every day he spent guiding tourists through the city, he sharpened his English. Every time he stood in front of a class, he practiced communicating with clarity and passion. Every rejection forced him to adapt, to find a skill, to learn something new. And while the world told him no, Jack kept whispering to himself, "Not yet." Because here's the truth: rejection is a brutal teacher, but it's also the most honest. It doesn't care about your ego. It doesn't soften the blow. But if you're willing to listen, rejection will teach you resilience, creativity, and the power to build something on your own terms. Jack once said, "If you can't get a seat at the table, build your own table." That mindset didn't come from success. It came from standing outside the restaurant window, watching everyone else eat, while he stood hungry and forgotten. It came from being rejected again and again until he realized maybe the system wasn't built for him. Maybe he would have to build his own. But don't mistake his journey for one of bitterness. Jack didn't grow angry at the rejections. He grew stronger because of them. He laughed them off. He told stories about them later, not as tragedies, but as stepping stones. The more you are rejected, he once explained, the more you learn how to stand up. And that's exactly what he did. At one point, Jack applied for a job as a hotel waiter. He thought it was a simple position, nothing glamorous, just enough to get by. Rejected, he tried the police, force rejected. He tried countless other roles, rejected. If rejection were a sport, Jack Ma would have been an Olympic champion. But here's where his story becomes different from most people. Most people, after that many failures, start to believe the rejections. They internalize the no's. They tell themselves, maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I'll never make it. Jack Ma refused. Instead, he said, someday they'll regret rejecting me. That was the fire inside him, not arrogance, vision. He believed, deep down, that his life wasn't meant to end as a rejected waiter or a forgotten tour guide. He believed rejection was pointing him to something bigger. Still, rejection hurts. And there was one rejection, one particular moment that cut deeper than all the others. It was the kind of rejection that doesn't just bruise your ego, changes the course of your life. Because it was, in that moment, facing yet another door slammed in his face. That Jack Ma realized something. The world was never going to hand him a place at the table. If he wanted one, he'd have to build the table himself. And that realization would push him toward a destiny no one could imagine. One rejection cut deeper than the rest, and it would push Jack toward a destiny no one could imagine. Picture this. It's 1995. Jack Ma, a man who had been rejected from jobs more than 30 times, is standing in a small office in Seattle, Washington. He isn't wealthy. He isn't a tech genius. In fact, he barely understands computers. But in that room, Jack Ma is about to see something that will flip his world upside down: the internet. At this point, Jack was a school teacher and part-time translator, guiding tourists, practicing English, and scraping together a living. He had no idea his life was about to collide with destiny. The opportunity came when he was asked to travel to the United States to help with a translation assignment. It wasn't glamorous, just another odd job to make ends meet. But this ordinary trip would ignite the spark that would change his entire life. Now remember, this was 1995. Most of the world didn't even know what the internet was. In China, hardly anyone had even heard of it, let alone touched it. Computers were rare. Connections were slow. The web was still a mystery. But when Jack's American friends introduced him to this new thing called the internet, his curiosity exploded. They sat him down in front of a computer and showed him how to search. Type anything, they said. Jack thought for a second and then typed a simple word: beer. And in an instant, the screen filled with results. American beer, German beer, Japanese beer. But there was one thing missing. Not a single mention of China. Jack blinked. He typed again, searching for China. Once more, nothing. For him, this wasn't just strange, it was shocking. How could the world's most populous country not exist on the internet? How could millions of businesses, thousands of years of history, an entire nation, be invisible in this new digital universe? And that's when the light bulb exploded in his mind. Jack didn't see just a missing search result. He saw an opportunity. He turned to his friends and said something that would echo throughout history. If China isn't on the internet, we'll put it there. That was the spark, the vision. The exact moment Jack Ma saw the future before anyone else in China did. He realized the internet wasn't just a tool, it was a revolution. It was going to change the way business worked forever. Fueled by this revelation, Jack returned to China, buzzing with ideas. He had no money, no tech background, and no investor contacts. But he had a belief. And sometimes, belief is the most powerful currency in the world. With a small group of friends, he launched his first internet company, China Pages. The idea was simple, but bold: help Chinese businesses create websites so they could be visible to the rest of the world. But let me be clear, this wasn't Silicon Valley. This wasn't a garage filled with venture capitalists waiting to throw millions at him. This was Hangzhou in the 1990s. Most people didn't even know what the internet was. Many thought it was a scam. Convincing traditional Chinese businesses to pay for a website was like convincing them to invest in fairy dust. Jack and his team knocked on doors, pitched their vision, and tried to sell the future. But again, rejection followed him. Business owners laughed. Some said, "Why would we need the internet? We already have telephones." Others dismissed him as a dreamer with no future. And truth be told, China Pages struggled. Jack faced technical problems, a lack of funding, and cultural skepticism. The company never took off the way he dreamed. Eventually, China Pages failed. Most people would have walked away right there. Another failure to add to the long list of rejections. Another reason to quit. But Jack wasn't like most people. He looked at China Pages not as a dead end, but as a classroom. Failure wasn't the end, it was education. He had proven something to himself. The internet was real. It was powerful. And even though his first attempt didn't work, the vision was too important to let go. He once told friends, "Today is difficult, tomorrow is more difficult, but the day after tomorrow is beautiful." Most die tomorrow night. China Pages was his tomorrow, the struggle, the pain, the lesson. But he knew the day after tomorrow was coming. Through China Pages, Jack learned three crucial things. First, he confirmed the internet would change commerce forever. Second, he realized China's businesses needed someone to bridge the gap between them and the world. And third, he discovered that failure wasn't fatal. It was fuel. And so, instead of quitting, Jack doubled down. He studied the internet more deeply. He imagined platforms that could connect buyers and sellers directly. He envisioned digital marketplaces where small businesses could thrive, for the little guy could compete with the big corporations. It wasn't about making money for himself. It was about creating opportunity for millions who had none. It was about leveling the playing field. But before that vision could come to life, Jack would have to go through even more rejection, more failure, more pain. Because destiny doesn't arrive gift-wrapped to test you, breaks you, and only then, if you refuse to give up, does it reveal itself. The trip to America lit the fire. China Pages gave him the scars. And those scars prepared him for something far greater than a small internet directory. They prepared him to build an empire. The world wasn't ready yet, but Jack Ma was. Failure of his first online venture could have ended the story, but instead, it set the stage for something that would change the entire world. Imagine this, a cramped apartment in Hangzhou. 1,999. The wallpaper is peeling, the furniture is mismatched, and the air is heavy with the smell of cheap tea. 17 people are squeezed into one small living room. Some are sitting cross-legged on the floor. Some are leaning against the walls. All of them are staring at one man, Jack Ma. Jack is pacing the room, his eyes alight with the kind of fire that makes you believe something impossible might just be within reach. He has no suit, no projector, no slick PowerPoint slides. Just a whiteboard, a marker, and a dream so outrageous it sounds insane. He looks around at his friends and colleagues, ordinary people. Not tech geniuses, not billionaires in the making. Teachers, neighbors, former students, people who trust him enough to show up. And then Jack says it. "We are going to build a global company, one that will make it possible for small businesses in China to sell to the world." Silence, confusion. Some people glance at each other nervously. How could this little man, who had already failed so many times, who had no background in technology, no government connections, and no money, possibly think he could take on the giants of the world? But Jack doesn't stop. His voice grows stronger, more animated. He tells them that the internet is the future. that while big corporations dominate small businesses, the corner shops, the manufacturers, the local merchants are being left behind. And he insists that the internet could give them a fighting chance. "We are not competing with the big guys," Jack explains. "We are helping the little guys. If we don't do this, who will?" That was the night Alibaba was born, not in a skyscraper, not with millions in funding, but in a tiny apartment filled with nothing but conviction. The name itself, Alibaba, was chosen because it was simple, easy to say in any language, and carried with it a story of magic, of secret doors opening with a single phrase: "Open Sesame." For Jack, Alibaba was about unlocking doors for small businesses. It was about opening a new world. But vision alone doesn't pay the bills. The early days of Alibaba were brutal. The team had no real funding, no advanced technology, and no roadmap. They worked from that apartment around the clock, sometimes surviving on instant noodles and determination. The first challenge was convincing Chinese businesses to even trust the internet. Many factory owners didn't own computers, let alone believe in building websites. To them, Jack sounded like a con man. "Why would I put my business online?" they asked. "Our customers are here, not on some screen." So Jack became not just a founder, but a teacher. He explained, persuaded, demonstrated, and begged. He showed them how the internet could connect a small shop in Hangzhou with buyers in America, Europe, or anywhere in the world. Slowly, painfully, one by one, he began to win believers. But the outside world wasn't any kinder. Investors looked at Alibaba and saw nothing but chaos. The company had no profits, no clear business model, and no big names behind it. Just Jack Ma, man who had been rejected more times than anyone could count, now promising to build the world's biggest marketplace out of a living room. Some laughed, others walked away. But Jack didn't quit. He never quit. In those early years, persistence became Alibaba's greatest asset. The team worked day and night, answering calls, building websites for businesses, and convincing suppliers to take a chance on this strange new idea. Each tiny victory felt monumental. Each client gained was proof that maybe, just maybe, they weren't crazy. Jack inspired his team with passion, not paychecks. He told them, "We will make it because we believe. We will never cry. We will never give up. Today is difficult. Tomorrow is more difficult. But the day after tomorrow is beautiful." That line became their anthem. And slowly, Alibaba began to grow. By the end of 1999, the company had managed to raise its first small investments, enough to keep the dream alive. Their platform started connecting Chinese exporters with buyers overseas. Factories that had never imagined reaching customers outside their provinces were now talking to clients in the United States, in Europe, in markets they never dreamed possible. Alibaba was still fragile, still unproven, but it had something few startups ever managed to capture: momentum. And with momentum came belief. The same friends and strangers who once doubted Jack now began to whisper, "Maybe he's onto something. Maybe the crazy teacher who failed his exams, who was rejected from jobs at KFC and the police force, is building the future." But Jack knew the journey was just beginning. For every small victory, storms were gathering on the horizon. Competitors were watching. Governments were skeptical. Investors were cautious. And failure still lurked at every corner. Alibaba wasn't yet the giant it would one day become. It was still fragile, still vulnerable. One wrong move, one major setback, and the entire dream could collapse before it truly began. But Jack Ma wasn't afraid of storms. His whole life had been a storm. Rejection, failure, humiliation, he had faced them all. And every time, he had gotten back up. And so, in that small apartment in Hangzhou, what began as a dream spoken to 17 friends would slowly grow into a revolution. A revolution that would give millions of small businesses a voice, that would put China firmly on the map of the internet. And that would make Jack Ma a symbol of resilience to the entire world. But destiny doesn't unfold without resistance. And even with Alibaba's birth, storms were already forming that could destroy everything before it began. Imagine standing on a battlefield littered with corpses. Not of soldiers, but of companies. The year is 2000. The internet boom, once hailed as the future, has turned into a massacre. The dot-com bubble bursts, and thousands of internet startups around the world collapse almost overnight. Dreams evaporate, fortunes vanish, and the internet itself becomes a dirty word. In China, the panic is just as fierce. Investors vanish. Confidence dies. The same businesses that once flirted with building an online future retreat into the safety of paper contracts and phone calls. For a tiny startup born in a Hangzhou apartment, this storm should have been the end. At the time, Alibaba wasn't making profits. It wasn't even close. Expenses were piling up, revenue was barely trickling in, and every investor Jack Ma had spoken to was suddenly slamming their doors shut. One after another, internet companies around him folded. The world said, the dream is over. But Jack Ma wasn't listening. He gathered his exhausted team in their small office. They were worried, anxious, and some were ready to give up. But Jack, with that fiery spark in his eyes, told them something they would never forget. We are different. We will survive. While others die, we will live. Because we are not chasing quick money, we are chasing a mission. Jack didn't lead like other CEOs. He wasn't the sharp-suited executive barking orders. He was quirky, dramatic, and at times, even theatrical. He would sing songs at company gatherings, tell wild stories, and remind his employees that they weren't just workers, they were warriors in a revolution. When the team felt beaten down, he told them, forget about making money for now. Focus on building value. If we survive this storm, the future will be ours. That kind of leadership, emotional, almost reckless, was exactly what Alibaba needed. Because while spreadsheets said they were finished, Jack's conviction made people believe they still had a chance. But belief doesn't pay salaries. Hope doesn't pay rent. The truth was brutal. Without money, Alibaba was going to die. And then came Masayoshi Son. Masayoshi Son, the visionary founder of SoftBank in Japan, was known for taking bold bets. He had already invested in internet companies in the US, and while most investors were running for the hills, Son was still searching for the next big thing. When he met Jack Ma, the two men couldn't have been more different. Son was polished, strategic, and already a billionaire. Jack was scrappy, unpolished, and known more for his failures than his successes. But the moment they sat down, sparks flew. Jack didn't pitch with spreadsheets or numbers. He pitched with passion. He spoke about how Alibaba wasn't just a company. It was a platform to empower millions of small businesses. He painted a vision of a future where Chinese merchants could compete with anyone in the world. Sun listened, and then, against all logic, against the backdrop of a collapsing internet economy, he made a decision that shocked everyone. SoftBank would invest $20 million in Alibaba. That check didn't just save the company, validated it. Suddenly, Alibaba wasn't just another dot-com startup waiting to die. It was alive. And not just alive, it had the backing of one of the most daring investors in the world. Inside Alibaba, morale exploded. The team, once exhausted and fearful, now believed they could make it. They tightened their belts, worked harder than ever, and doubled down on their mission. Jack rallied them constantly, telling them, "Today is tough, tomorrow is tougher. But the day after tomorrow will be sunshine." And through sheer resilience, Alibaba survived the dot-com crash. But survival wasn't victory. In the ashes of the dot-com collapse, only a handful of companies remained standing. Amazon, eBay, and now Alibaba. These weren't just startups anymore. They were survivors hardened by fire. Yet survival came with a price. The battlefield was no longer empty. Giants were rising. eBay had entered China with enormous resources. Amazon was expanding globally. These weren't small competitors. They were titans with billions in funding. Armies of engineers and reputations that dwarfed Alibaba's. For Jack Ma and his ragtag team in Hangzhou, the message was clear. Surviving the crash was just step one. Now came the real fight, the fight to prove that Alibaba could not only survive, but also dominate. Jack told his team, "If eBay is a shark in the ocean, we are a crocodile in the Yangtze River. If we fight in the ocean, we lose. But in the river, we win." It was a metaphor, but it carried a powerful truth. Alibaba couldn't outspend or outmuscle its global competitors, but it could outthink them. It could understand China better than anyone else. It could play the long game. The dot-com crash had almost killed Alibaba. But it also hardened Jack Ma. It taught him that vision and resilience were more valuable than any spreadsheet. It gave him the confidence to believe that even giants could bleed. Alibaba was alive, but surviving was not enough. To win, Jack had to face his biggest challenge yet: how to beat the giants at their own game. Picture this. It's the early 2000s. The internet is back on its feet after the dot-com crash. And in China, a new battle is about to begin. On one side, a giant eBay, the global marketplace king. Armed with billions of dollars, thousands of employees, and the confidence of dominating online auctions around the world. On the other side, a scrappy underdog called Alibaba, still fragile, still doubted. Still seen as a strange little company run out of Hangzhou by a failed teacher named Jack Ma. Everyone thought the outcome was obvious. How could a local Chinese company possibly stand against the might of eBay? This wasn't just David versus Goliath, it was an ant standing in front of a bulldozer. But Jack Ma didn't see it that way. He looked at eBay and said, "They may be powerful, but they don't understand China. And if you don't understand China, you cannot win in China." eBay entered the Chinese market with force, confident that its global brand and deep pockets would crush any competition. They built a sleek platform, invested heavily in marketing, and told the world, "We will own China." But while eBay built for the world, Jack Ma built for his people. In 2003, Alibaba launched Taobao, an online marketplace designed not for global users, but for Chinese buyers and sellers. From the very beginning, Taobao wasn't a copy of eBay. It was something different, something alive. First, Jack made Taobao free. While eBay charged fees for listings, Taobao didn't. Sellers could put their products online without paying a cent. For small Chinese businesses struggling to survive, that was a game changer. Second, Taobao focused on trust and connection. Jack knew Chinese buyers were skeptical of strangers on the internet. So he introduced a live customer service chat tool called Ali Wang Wing. Buyers could talk directly to sellers before making a purchase. They could ask questions, negotiate prices, and build relationships, something eBay never imagined. Third, Jack understood culture. Taobao wasn't a sterile, plain website like eBay. It was colorful, lively, filled with banners, icons, and designs that felt familiar to Chinese shoppers. Where eBay felt foreign, Taobao felt like home. eBay didn't take Taobao seriously. They looked at Jack Ma's scrappy platform and dismissed it as amateur. They thought their brand power alone would crush him. But while eBay was laughing, Jack was learning. Taobao exploded. Sellers flooded in because it was free. Buyers trusted it because of Ali Wang Wang. And slowly, the tide began to turn. By listening to the local market, by speaking the language of his people, Jack was building something eBay couldn't replicate. By 2005, eBay realized something was wrong. Despite their billions in resources, their market share in China was shrinking. Taobao was winning. The underdog was biting the giant. Jack didn't stop there. He rallied his team with speeches, often quirky and dramatic, but always inspiring. He reminded them that they weren't just fighting for a company, they were fighting for the survival of Chinese entrepreneurs, for small businesses who needed a chance. By 2006, the impossible happened. eBay admitted defeat. They shut down their China site. The global giant, the company that had crushed competitors worldwide, walked away beaten by a former teacher with no tech background and his ragtag team from Hangzhou. It was David versus Goliath, and David had won. For Jack Ma, this victory wasn't just about business. It was about proving that local knowledge, creativity, and resilience could defeat money, power, and arrogance. It was about showing the world that China wasn't just a market to be conquered, it was a force to be reckoned with. And for Alibaba, it was the moment the company transformed from a struggling startup into a national hero. The people of China saw in Jack Ma something of themselves, the rejected, the underestimated, the small player who dared to challenge giants and win. But Jack didn't let the victory go to his head. He reminded his team constantly, "Today, we win, but tomorrow, new battles will come. We cannot stop." Because the truth was clear, defeating eBay was only the beginning. Yes, Alibaba had crushed a giant. Yes, Taobao had proven that local vision could beat global muscle. But the next challenges waiting on the horizon were even bigger. How would Alibaba survive on the global stage? How would it transform from a local champion into an international powerhouse? Victory over eBay was sweet. But Jack's real test was still ahead. Could Alibaba survive the global stage? Imagine a stage in New York City, September 2014. The flashing lights, the cameras, the roar of Wall Street traders echoing through the air. And there, standing in the middle of it all, is Jack Ma, former teacher, the rejected job applicant. The man who once guided tourists for pennies. On this day, he isn't a rejected underdog anymore. On this day, he is leading the largest IPO in human history. Alibaba goes public on the New York Stock Exchange, and the numbers are staggering. $25 billion raised in a single day. No company had ever done that before. Overnight, Alibaba isn't just a Chinese company, it's a global powerhouse. Overnight, Jack Ma isn't just a survivor, he becomes one of the richest men alive. The world stares in shock. How could a man who was once rejected by KFC, who failed exams again and again, who had no background in technology, now stand shoulder to shoulder with titans like Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, and Warren Buffett? Jack smiles, that mischievous, boyish grin that has become his trademark, and says something that perfectly sums up his philosophy. Today is not about money, 'tis about trust. Because Alibaba wasn't built on wealth. It was built on belief. Belief that small businesses mattered. Belief that rejection wasn't the end. Belief that China had something powerful to offer the world. The IPO doesn't just make headlines, makes history. And suddenly, the entire planet knows the name Jack Ma. But here's what makes Jack different. Most people, after raising billions, after becoming billionaires, after reaching the very peak of success, would become untouchable, distant, corporate. Not Jack. At Alibaba's company events, he doesn't stand stiff in a suit delivering boring speeches. He sings, he dances. One year, he dressed up as Michael Jackson and moonwalked across the stage in front of his employees. Another time, he performed as a rock star in front of tens of thousands of cheering staff. To him, leadership isn't about hierarchy, it's about energy. It's about making people believe they're part of something magical. He once told his employees, customers first, employees second, shareholders third. That wasn't just a slogan, it was a promise. To Jack, business was never about worshiping money. It was about creating value, inspiring people, and lifting others along with you. And his quirkiness didn't stop at the stage. Jack loved quoting Forrest Gump. He would tell anyone who listened, "Forrest Gump is my hero. He never gives up. He does not complain. He just runs." To Jack, life wasn't about being the smartest, the strongest, or the luckiest. It was about being the most persistent runner on the track. That was the message he carried from his humble days as a tour guide all the way to ringing the bell at the New York Stock Exchange. From guiding tourists around Westlake for a free English lesson to guiding an army of businesses into the global marketplace. Alibaba, under Jack's leadership, wasn't just a company, it was a movement. By 2014, it was serving millions of businesses and consumers around the globe. Small merchants in tiny towns were selling to buyers halfway across the world. Farmers, artisans, and factory owners had access to global markets they never dreamed of touching. Jack Ma had turned impossible into inevitable. But here's the thing about success. It's a double-edged sword. When you rise to the very top, the world celebrates you, but it also watches you more closely than ever. With every cheer comes criticism. With every victory comes new battles. Jack understood this better than anyone. He often told his team, when you are small, you know who your friends are. When you are big, you don't even know who your enemies are. The IPO wasn't the end of the journey, it was the beginning of a new one. Alibaba now had the responsibility of not just surviving, but thriving on the global stage. Competitors were watching. Governments were watching. Critics were sharpening their knives. And Jack knew it. That's why, even in the middle of his greatest triumph, he never lost his humility. He reminded people constantly that money and fame were not the goal. We are never in lack of money, he said. We are in lack of people with dreams, who can die for those dreams. That's what drove him, not the billions, not the headlines, but the dream, the mission, the stubborn belief that small people with big ideas could change the world. In 2014, the world crowned Jack Ma a billionaire icon. But inside, he was still the same boy who cycled miles to practice English, who failed exams again and again, who was told no more times than anyone should endure. And maybe that's why people loved him. He wasn't polished. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't born into power. He was proof that resilience, vision, and relentless belief could defy all odds. But Jack himself knew the truth. Success is never permanent. The world is always changing. And for Alibaba, the future battles would not be fought in apartments or against eBay. They would be fought on the global stage, in a world where politics, competition, and technology could turn overnight. Jack Ma had climbed higher than he ever imagined. But he also knew, the higher you climb, the harder the fall. And so, even at the very top, Jack kept running, because he knew the price of greatness is never cheap. But even at the top, Jack knew success wasn't permanent. The world was changing again. The price of greatness was never cheap. Imagine standing at the top of the mountain you've spent your entire life climbing. The world below looks small. You've defied gravity, silenced critics, and proven everyone wrong. For Jack Ma, by 2017, that was reality. He was China's most famous entrepreneur, one of the richest men alive, and the face of innovation in the East. But what Jack didn't know, or perhaps what he underestimated, was that at the very peak, storms are strongest. The higher you climb, the more visible you become. And in China, visibility is power. And power always comes with a price. For years, Jack had been celebrated for his boldness. He was the teacher who became a billionaire, the underdog who had beaten eBay, the man who brought Chinese businesses onto the global stage. But by 2017, his boldness began to rub against the very institutions that once tolerated his rise, the government regulators. Jack had a habit of speaking his mind. In speeches, he often criticized outdated banking systems, rigid regulations, and the slow pace of bureaucracy. To global audiences, his candor made him charismatic. But at home, those words cut deep. Some saw them as a challenge to authority. The tension grew quietly at first. Behind the smiles, behind the applause, eyes were watching. Every bold statement was noted. Every critique was filed away. Then came 2020, the year that would shake Jack Ma's world. Alibaba had already grown into a giant, but another one of Jack's creations, Ant Group, was about to make history. Ant Group, the financial arm behind Alipay, had become one of the largest fintech companies in the world. It was set to go public in what would have been the largest IPO ever, $37 billion. The world was watching. Investors were salivating. Jack Ma was about to shatter records again. And then, the unthinkable happened. Just days before the IPO, regulators stepped in. They halted the deal. The entire world was stunned. How could a $37 billion offering, one of the biggest in financial history, be frozen overnight? The message was clear. Power has limits, even for Jack Ma. It wasn't just a business setback. It was a thunderclap. Almost instantly, Jack disappeared from public view. The man who had once been everywhere in interviews, conferences, global forums suddenly went silent. For months, there was no Jack Ma. No speeches, no appearances, no word. The world speculated wildly. Was he in hiding? Was he punished? Was he silenced? Headlines screamed. Rumors spread. Some wondered if the story of Jack Ma had come to a sudden and tragic end. And then, months later, he reappeared, smiling, thinner, but different. Jack Ma returned, but not as the larger-than-life figure he once was. He was quieter, more cautious. The fire in his speeches was dimmer. The bold criticisms had vanished. Instead, his words focused on education, philanthropy, and a softer mission, helping teachers, empowering rural students, giving back. It was clear Jack had chosen a different path. In 2019, even before the Ant Group drama, he had announced his retirement from Alibaba. Standing before his employees on the company's 20th anniversary, he said, "I want to return to being a teacher, because that's what I love most." He passed the reins of Alibaba to the next generation of leaders and shifted his focus to charity, education, and global philanthropy. He had gone from tour guide to rejected job applicant, to billionaire icon, to global inspiration and, now, to philanthropist. It was as if life had come full circle. The teacher had returned to teaching. But make no mistake, this wasn't just a quiet ending. Jack's retreat from the spotlight carried a powerful lesson. Even the strongest face storms. Even billionaires who reshape economies must bow to forces bigger than themselves. Success doesn't make you untouchable. At the highest level, it makes you a target. And yet, Jack didn't see it as a defeat. He saw it as a transformation. He often reminded people that life isn't about how high you climb, but about how much you give back when you've made it. So, while the storms around him raged, Jack turned his energy toward planting seeds for the future. He funded rural schools in China, championed environmental causes, and invested in young entrepreneurs. He no longer sought the spotlight, he sought legacy. Because at the end of the day, Jack Ma knew something that all true visionaries understand. Companies rise and fall. Fortunes come and go. But what you leave behind in people, that lasts forever. From a boy rejected by schools, to a man rejected by jobs, to a billionaire humbled by storms. Jack's journey wasn't about invincibility. It was about resilience. About never letting rejection, failure, or even power itself define who you are. And that's the story the world saw in those years. Jack Ma, once larger than life, choosing to step back to give back. And to remind us all that no matter how high you climb, storms will come. But storms don't erase legacy. Jack's battles with power remind us of one thing. Even the strongest face storms, but legacy is built by what you leave behind. Imagine a boy pedaling his bicycle through the streets of Hangzhou, chasing tourists just to practice a few words of English. A boy who failed his exams, who was rejected from schools, from jobs, from the police, from hotels, even from KFC. That boy, Jack Ma, was told no more than 30 times before life ever gave him a single yes. And yet, decades later, that same boy would stand on the global stage, ringing the bell at the New York Stock Exchange, leading the largest IPO in history, and becoming one of the richest men in Asia. Jack Ma's story is not just about wealth, it's about possibility. It's about proving that even when the world laughs at you, even when doors slam in your face, even when failure seems permanent, you can still rise. From poverty to a billionaire. From 30 rejections to a global icon. From a failed teacher to the face of China's digital revolution. That's not luck. That's legacy. But what makes Jack's journey so powerful isn't the billions he made it s, the millions he inspired. Entrepreneurs across the world look at him and see proof that you, Dan T, need to be born rich. You don't need perfect grades, and you don't need everyone's approval to succeed. What you need is resilience, creativity, and the courage to keep going when everyone else has given up. Jack once said, "Never give up. Today is hard, tomorrow will be worse, but the day after tomorrow will be sunshine." Those weren't just empty words, he lived them. His childhood was hard, his 20s were worse, but his day after tomorrow, that was sunshine brighter than he ever imagined. Think about it. How many people in your life have told you you're not good enough? How many times have you been rejected? How many times have you thought about quitting because the weight of failure was too heavy? Jack Ma is living proof that rejection can be the foundation of revolution. What most people see as the end, Jack saw as the beginning. And maybe that's the greatest lesson he left us. Failure is not fatal. Rejection is not permanent. Obstacles are not walls. They are doorways. If you are brave enough to push through them. Jack Ma's legacy is not just Alibaba or Ant Group or Taobao. His legacy is in the millions of small businesses that found hope because of his platforms. His legacy is in the young entrepreneurs who dare to dream bigger because they know his story. His legacy is in the philosophy that you, Don T, need to be extraordinary to do extraordinary things. You just need to refuse to quit. Even when Jack faced his own storms, when government pressure silenced him, when Ant Group's historic IPO was halted, when he disappeared from public view, his story didn't collapse. Because legacies aren't measured by temporary setbacks. They're measured by the impact you leave behind. And Jack Ma's impact is undeniable. He showed the world that you can be quirky, unconventional, even underestimated, and still change history. He proved that leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about inspiring people to believe. He proved that wealth and power mean nothing if you, Don T, use them to build opportunity for others. From guiding tourists on his bicycle to guiding millions of entrepreneurs online. From a man no one would hire to a man who hired hundreds of thousands. From failure to rejection to revolution. That is the legacy of Jack Ma. And now the question is, what about you? What rejection has been holding you back? What failure have you been carrying like a weight, convincing yourself that it means the end? What dream have you abandoned because someone told you it was impossible? Jack Ma's story is not about money, it's about resilience. It's about daring to keep running when everyone else has stopped. It's about believing in tomorrow, even when today feels impossible. If Jack Ma, a poor boy from Hangzhou, rejected more than 30 times, can turn failure into fortune, rejection into revolution, and impossibility into destiny, what's stopping you? His journey leaves us with one undeniable truth. You don't have to be born special. You just have to be willing to keep going. Because today is hard. Tomorrow will be worse. But the day after tomorrow, that's sunshine. Jack Ma's story is not about money. It's about resilience. If he can turn rejection into revolution, what's stopping you from building your own future?